And we're live again. Welcome to the Bitcoin Digest, where we discuss all things Bitcoin. And back on the right screen, as I said, this is live. So anything can happen when we go live. So just bear that in mind. I'm not perfect and just trying to practice as much as I can to make perfection. But back to the matter at hand. This is episode 6 on Tuesday, the 23rd of May, 2023. I've missed a couple of days of video recording, but you have to bear with me, just trying to adjust with my current schedule. So I may not always go live every day, but I'll try my best to keep it as close to every day as possible. As always, as I said, this goes out on Zoom. Everyone is welcome to join. Of course, in terms of start times, I'm not always quite as accurate, so there's always a hit and miss. But if anyone's interested in joining, always drop me a message on any of the YouTube videos. I'll always pick that up. And if anyone's interested, and I can always make sure that I go live on time for that specific episode or showing. Instructions as can be seen on screen for Zoom. Again, there's only one rule in this place, and that's no talking about shitcoins unless you're dumping on them, of course. So we'll take the usual similar procedures and process for this video. We'll go through the Clark Moody's dashboard, then we'll go on to the Lightning Explorer mempool, and then got the topic for today, which is my thoughts about the presidential candidates, in particular Robert F. Kennedy. Just wanted to give some thoughts about that. I know I've already spoken about that, but it's very intriguing to me because two presidential candidates attended the recent Bitcoin 2023 conference. And if you weren't aware of that conference, then I would highly recommend that you watch it or watch some of the key highlights, one of which is the keynote speeches from two of the presidential candidates, Robert F. Kennedy, of course, and also Vivek Ramaswamy. So those are very interesting. And of course, I'm going to give you my thoughts about those in this video. So without further ado, let's dive straight into it. Just going to quick refresh on the Clark Moody's dashboard. So Bitcoin is currently sitting at $27,185 per Bitcoin. $1 will get you 3,679 sats. The market capitalization of Bitcoin is now at $526.8 billion. In terms of mining hash rates, so we've got the hash rate sitting at 365.7 exahashes. So there's been a relative increase in the hash rates recently. Difficulty is at 49 trillions, and then difficulty epoch, we're currently at 393. The last difficulty change was an increase of 3.2%. And the block time is currently running at a speedy 9 minutes and 31 seconds. So I guess we're going to be anticipating an upward difficulty adjustment. And as we can see, the difficulty retarget confirms that the retarget date will be the 31st of May, 2023, pretty much towards the end of this week, early next week. Estimated difficulty change is an increase of 0.8% in the difficulty. Block time difficulty epoch will be 9 minutes and 55 seconds. So not quite high enough to bring us back to parity of 10 minutes, but close enough. Mining subsidy, nothing's changed there. It's still the usual 6.25 Bitcoin. The value of that is currently sitting at $170,000 for 6.25 Bitcoin. A 1 petahash of Bitcoin of 1 petahash of mining power will get you $78.22. And that's an average fees per block is currently coming in at 0.74 Bitcoin, which is a significant drop. That's about 10% of the main the block subsidy, which is of course 6.25%. So yeah, it's normalizing. It's coming back. This is what it's usually at. Of course, a few weeks back, or a couple of weeks or 2-3 weeks back, we saw that real spike in the fees per block, and that pretty much was almost in line, almost 100% of the block subsidy. So that was quite incredible. But we're now back to our usual self, and of course, mempools are still relatively expensive, which we'll come to and have a look in a moment. But it's nowhere near what it was during the ordinals craze, and as we thought it was only really ever going to be a temporary thing, and it's clearly proven to be the case. The halving is obviously due next year, 21st of April, 2024. So we're pretty much 11 months away from the next halving. So I think I will leave it there with the Clark's dashboard. Other things which is obviously of interest, the Lightning Network, total capacity in the Lightning Network is 5,337.17 Bitcoin. And the value of that is $145 million. Total nodes on the network is about 16,424, and total channels is about 71,512. Tor capacity is about 3,376. Percentage Tor is about 63% Tor, so very, very anonymous Lightning Network there, which is good to see. One of the largest nodes, Bitfinex node, I think is the largest node at the moment. Let's see what that says there. So that's about the Bitfinex Lightning node, plus about Bitfinex, that's fine. But yeah, I think it's probably one of the largest nodes on the network. It's currently got an inbound capacity of 89 Bitcoin, outbound capacity of 1,311 Bitcoin. And it has about 1,050 channels, so a pretty big channel. Not going to deal with Liquid Network. In terms of money supply, I think it's worth mentioning this, I guess. Money supply is about 19,381,674 Bitcoin that has been mined to date, and that's 92.29% of the current Bitcoin mineable. 219.29 Bitcoins are unspendable, and 1,618,106.23 Bitcoin remains to be issued. So there we are. A little bit more comprehensive with the Clark Moody's dashboard today. Sort of like went all out on it. I guess I'm getting a little bit more familiar with what these figures mean, which is a good thing. But yeah, there you go. On to the mempool. Just click refresh on that very quickly. So what we have here, the last block was 791,102. It was 2 minutes ago, mined by Brains Pool. It had an average of 20 sats per byte, 20 sats per virtual byte. So 20 sats would have got you, 20 sats per virtual byte would have got you into that block. So it's relatively expensive still, but you know, it's not unreasonable. and the previous one was 21, and the previous one and the one before that was 22. So on average, we could see that the fees are sort of stable. I think there are periods where the fees are expensive, and there are periods where it goes down a bit. But when I mean expensive, it's about 64 sats per virtual byte, which compared to what it was 2 or 3 weeks ago is nothing. Is a significant improvement. So as you can see, those boxes are no longer that red that we used to see. It's more brownish in color, which suggests that it's not quite as, the fees are not quite as high. I mean, we're about 220 blocks deep in terms of what's sitting in the mempool at the moment. So yeah, and obviously currently, you know, to get into the next block, you're gonna have to you're looking at about 33 sats per virtual byte as a minimum to get you into the next block, which will confirm in the next 10 minutes. So I think that's it for the mempool. Now, on to the story of the day, which I want to talk about. So, as you all know, we had the Bitcoin 2023 conference this year over the weekend, which concluded over this weekend. I thought it was an absolutely excellent conference, as usual, didn't disappoint. Some great highlights, some things to actually celebrate about the conference. But what really stood out for me a lot was the presidential candidates that actually gave keynote speeches at the conference. And I was really, really impressed by all of them. Obviously, the key ones, just going back to my board here, key ones were, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy, and also Tulsi Gabbard. Although Tulsi Gabbard isn't technically a candidate yet, she is considering her position as to whether or not she should throw her proverbial hat in the ring. So we'll have to wait and see whether she does so. But for now, but she also, in any event, she also gave a keynote speech at the conference, and that was also quite interesting. Some caveats before we delve into this issue. Firstly, I think it's important to always remember that we as Bitcoiners, or at least hard money advocates, Austrian economists, aficionados or believers or supporters, however you want to frame it, we don't put our hopes in central authorities, especially politicians. So that's a very, very key point to always bear in mind and remember. And then secondly, it is important as Bitcoiners that we adopt the adversarial mindset. And that really is the best way to keep Bitcoin anti-fragile. That for me, I think, is a very important thing. So we must always believe that attackers are out there to get us, to not to get us literally, but to get Bitcoin. And so we as Bitcoiners should adopt an anti-fragile lifestyle, a Bitcoin lifestyle, which means not keeping our money on exchanges, not relying on third parties, learning how to self-custody your own Bitcoin, learning how to run your own nodes. These things are very important to be censorship. I'll try and say that word. Censorship resistant. I can't believe it. I never ever thought I couldn't be able to say that word, but there we are. We're live, and these things happen. Censorship resistance. That's it. There you go. So we have to learn to be censorship resistant. And these things, these practices, if we adopt them en masse, then we we become more and more resilient and censorship resistant and anti-fragile. So those are the key points I thought I should caveat this conversation about to have about these presidential candidates. But of course, winning that particular battle is also an important thing, and shouldn't be looked at as a bad thing necessarily, albeit with us having our guards about us. Having the political arm on the side of Bitcoin isn't a bad thing either. It could be an important thing. And I think Corey Clipston, if you haven't seen this article by Corey Clipston, I very highly recommend it. I'll touch upon it a little bit because I think it gives a different perspective on how we as Bitcoiners can also win on the political side. We can, our force, our strength and our force itself could act almost like a force that could fight against the government and actually win over the government to our side, and the governing party and the ruling party, or the political party, whichever one you want to call. So I want to delve into this article because I think it really does drive home the point. So Corey Clipston in this, I don't want to read too much of it, but I'll read the very first part of it because I think it's really worth just hearing this out. So he says, not too many years from now, the number of Bitcoiners in the United States of America will cross 10 million. When we hit that milestone, it's game over. Bitcoin wins. My favorite writer and thinker, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, well, at the time he was, but probably not now. And this article was obviously written in 2020, some 3 years ago. So some things have changed about Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Let's put it that way. Wouldn't necessarily call him a Bitcoiner anymore if he ever was. So I think it's worth just bearing that in mind. But nevertheless, let's carry on with the article. So Taleb wrote about this intransigent minority in his book, Skin in the Game. Here's the concept and how it works. Almost every packaged food product for sale in the United States has a tiny U inside a circle printed outside. Very few United States residents require the kosher certification indicated by that U, but it's easier for food companies not to have to make 2 separate lines for every product. So they generally make everything kosher. The rule per Taleb is a kosher eater will never eat non-kosher food, but a non-kosher eater isn't banned from eating kosher. For most observed complex systems, the minority contingent required to flip a population to comply with the intransigent view is in the 3 to 4% range. With a US population of 325 million, 3% is 10 million. And then he goes on to talk about Bitcoin, and I could go into that a little bit, but I think we'll probably leave it there because the point is taken, and it's only a side point, and why this concept of the 3 to 4% swaying. And in a way, you could almost argue that we're beginning to see that element of sway, because 2, 3, 4 years ago, even the previous presidential election, there was zero talk about Bitcoin in the previous presidential election. No one talked about it. No candidates mentioned it or talked about it. All of a sudden, here we are in 2023 facing an election in 2024 with a president potentially being a new president potentially being sworn in January 2025. And here we are 2 years beforehand. We've got presidential candidates talking about Bitcoin. And could this not be the drive that we're heading, inching and edging closer to that 3 to 4% intransigent minority who are effectively just Bitcoin votes? And anyone who throws their hat in the ring for Bitcoin, they're effectively going to vote for that person. And so these candidates are looking at that potentially. I don't know what the numbers are in terms of Bitcoiners, but even that percent, even if it was less than a percentage, for one candidate, that could be significant if all Bitcoiners throw their weight behind that particular candidate. So you could begin to see the game theory playing out here, where candidates are literally vying for that Bitcoiner vote. And I guess in a way you could say it's not just Bitcoin, it could also be crypto, but they're all shit coins anyways. Who cares about them? But in any event, I think just looking at those Bitcoin those Bitcoin votes, I think it's really, really, we're getting very close to it being quite a significant influence and pull and power. So I think we're heading towards this intransigent minority. This may be a sign that we're heading towards that intransigent minority. And that in itself is powerful. It's a powerful tool to influence how government tries to act or react. And in a way, as Corey Clipston puts it, Bitcoin wins. So now, having all of those caveats in mind, let's go back and see. So looking at the candidates for the election, on the Democrat side, we obviously have Joe Biden, who is the incumbent president, and we have Robert F. Kennedy, and we also have Marianne Williamson. And I mean, this is probably becoming a meme right now. I'm sure you may have heard this from other places, but we've got Joe Biden, who is practically, an old age pensioner who is heading towards a home, whatever they call them, old people's home, perhaps, or probably should have been in one by now. And that's probably where he's best placed, in a old people's home rather than the White House. But then we've also then got the other person then who really has got any sort of notoriety is Robert F. Kennedy, an individual who is quite pro Bitcoin, and I'm going to delve into his speech, his keynote speech at the Bitcoin conference, because it was quite spectacular. I've already done a quote from him about his take on Bitcoin mining, right? That tweet that he sent out, and I read it in one of the episodes that I've done recently. And that was quite impressive. But I tell you, this recent speech that he's given at the Bitcoin conference, it just blew me away. It blew me away. I was completely impressed by it. Given all the caveats I've already mentioned in this video, I was completely blown away by it. Marianne Williamson, I don't know who she is. I'm not American, but I don't really know who she is. But that in itself probably speaks volumes. So going on to the Republican candidate side, there seems to be a lot more candidates listed here as popular candidates. We've got talk show hosts, Larry Elder. We've got senators, Tim Scott. We've got lots of other governors, Asa Hutchinson. We've got ambassadors and former ambassadors of the UN and current governors. We've got Nikki Haley there. So lots of big wigs throwing their proverbial hat in the ring. But another one that stands out there is Vivek Ramaswamy, and he also gave a speech at the Bitcoin conference, which was also interesting, not quite as charismatic as Robert F. Kennedy's speech. And of course, we've got Donald Trump, who is always the elephant in the room. You probably still have to favor Donald Trump as a Republican candidate, but we'll just have to wait and see how that pans out. But of course, interesting to see another potentially pro Bitcoin, although I'm not quite putting Vivek in the pro Bitcoin category. I'll give some very short views on his speech, what I think about it. But yes, of course, there is also potentially others who are pro Bitcoin who may be throwing their hat in the ring, and we just have to wait and see. And yeah, so I'll leave it at that, and I'll delve straight into my views on that speech. So before I do so, as I said, Vivek Ramaswamy, I'm just going to talk about Vivek very, very briefly. His speech was mixed for me. I mean, the main thing I took away from his speech was this dollar-backed basket of currencies. And I mean, I guess when I say basket of currencies, it's more like basket of commodities. So my apologies there. So what he's basically saying that he would like the dollar to be backed by a basket of commodities. What those commodities are, I have no idea. And the rationale behind it, I'm not sure. It sounds something similar or akin to what the BRICS nations are doing, which is to also create a neutral currency that's backed by commodities. What those commodities are, again, just what is it? Rice, beans, I don't know, vegetables, tulips, copper. I have no idea what commodities are they talking about. Commodities is such a wide thing. I mean, are you talking about, durable commodities like gold, or or perishable commodities like rice and wheat? Like it doesn't make any sense. But then when you've got something like Bitcoin, it was a little bit of a shame. And he didn't really speak much about Bitcoin. He didn't really say much about Bitcoin. He wasn't really committed, other than to say that, people shouldn't be oppressed, which is great. But that's just a talking point. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, non-Bitcoiners don't think people should be oppressed. So I was underwhelmed by his speech. And again, similarly, Tulsi Gabbard, she was non-specific. I mean, again, she didn't really say anything specific about Bitcoin that caught my attention. And I was, in a way, quite underwhelmed by her as well. So those are my views on those two. Obviously, we have Governor DeSantis, who has always been very outspoken about Bitcoin, in favor of Bitcoin, but he hasn't thrown his hat in the ring yet. He hasn't put himself forward as a candidate, and we'll just have to wait and see. I think if he did, then he will be a clear pro-Bitcoiner from the Republican side to put his hat in the ring, but we'll have to wait and see if that happens. So those are my views on those two. I think it's now apt to delve into what Robert F. Kennedy said in his keynote. So Robert F. Kennedy, he laid down 6 key points relating to Bitcoin that he would want, if he were to be elected, that he's going to put into place to support Bitcoin. Support in a loose term, but to show his allegiance to Bitcoin effectively. The first one, he said, is that he will defend the rights of individuals to self-custody Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And he made it clear that you should be able to own your wallet like the keys to your car. I thought that was so powerful to start off with that. We know all too well that not your keys, not your coins. And, Bitcoin is the number one bearer instrument. It is one way you can hold your own asset in the most practical sense of it. You can hold a penny's worth of Bitcoin, or you could hold $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. And the key factor there that allows you to possess your Bitcoin is your key, is your private key, or your seed phrase, your 12-word seed phrase, or 24-word seed phrase, or 36-word seed phrase, whatever that is. Holding those, we've got attacks on it from various organizations saying, like various government bodies, like the European Union, and even, questionable whether the US hasn't given any clarity on their position or stance in this, that, it may be illegal to hold your own keys. The EU were talking about it's being illegal to hold your own keys and that you must put your keys with custodians. And it's just, it smacks of absolute degenerate behavior. It smacks of, they don't care about people's rights. They don't care about people's freedoms. They don't care about people's property rights to possession, right to, none of that. This Bitcoin is the ultimate manifestation of rights to property, rights to freedom, when you can decide what you hold your value in and how you hold your value. And governments telling people how to hold their own value, and saying that you can't hold your own value and you need the government's permission, or the government has to tell you where your value has to be held. It's madness. And so him making this his number one fundamental point, I think, was absolutely brilliant. And he got an absolute ovation for this. And I was just too impressed by it that, even if he eventually doesn't follow through with it, if he were to be elected, obviously I'll be disappointed, and I'm sure we all will be disappointed. But the fact that he recognizes that this is important in itself is significant. Then the next point that he makes was number two key point that he's put forward is that he will uphold the right to run a node at home. I mean, this is impressive. It's firstly, not even many Bitcoiners understand the significance and importance of running a node. But this guy, I mean, to say that he was going to uphold the right to run a node at home is the pure essence of Bitcoin being decentralized. Without people running nodes, Bitcoin will become fragile. Governments can go around and shut down every single person that runs a node. If they do that, let's say, for example, that there are 50,000 nodes in the world, and governments are successful, and of course, we must remember there's a node as well up in the Earth's atmosphere, which was placed there by Blockstream, in a satellite that's currently orbiting around the Earth. So I'm not quite sure the government will be able to shut down every single node in the world, because there will still be that one node floating up, orbiting the planet, unless they shut it down, of course. I mean, they could get a missile and shoot the satellite down and destroy that node there as well. Hey, that's a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. But nevertheless, governments would have to go to each and every single home and destroy the nodes to be able to successfully kill Bitcoin. And so once you identify that as the weak point for Bitcoin, it's not a weak point, it's just a point. You see the importance of there being many, 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 many nodes. You cannot have too many Bitcoin nodes. In fact, the more Bitcoin nodes there are, the more anti-fragile Bitcoin becomes, the more impossible it becomes, the more likely it becomes for governments to be able to destroy Bitcoin. And so this second point, it was complete music to my ears when he effectively said that he will uphold the rights to run a node at home. Wow, mind blowing. Like literally saying, in other words, I am going to protect people's rights to protect Bitcoin. Wow, powerful stuff. He also then went on to say, I think this Elizabeth Warren is the one that pushes this point. It was just trying to get in legislation in the US about, KYC and at the node level. If you run a node, then you must go through KYC procedures. Absolute nonsense. Good luck trying to enforce that. But be that as it is, obviously, as you said, as you've seen on the network, 60% of nodes that run the Lightning Network, of course, Lightning Network nodes also run Bitcoin. Lightning Network nodes are also Bitcoin nodes, so you might as well count them as the same thing. 60% of those run on Tor. Both of my nodes are Tor nodes. So it's hard to even find out where these nodes are anyways, because they're running a Tor network, which is private and quite confidential and private and difficult to actually work out whereabouts they're located in the world. So I think this is why I absolutely love this second point, and I know I spending a lot of time on each of these points, but I just wanted to, sorry for that, I just wanted to really just set out, just to explain how powerful these points are. And I know Matt Odell made a point because he after the speech, he was on one of the it was one of the commentators who commented on the outcome on the speech immediately after the speech, and Matt Odell sort of said, "Oh, I don't know who wrote this speech for him, because obviously he's only new to Bitcoin. He's only known Bitcoin very shortly, so I'm not really sure who's written his speech for him. But whoever wrote his speech has done a fantastic job." I thought that was brilliant. But it is true. I mean, these points are really points that can only be understood very well by Bitcoiners. You just don't get your ordinary man in the street, or your ordinary crypto bro on the street to get or understand any of this. And these 2 points straight away, they're like arrows to the bullseye. Absolutely magnificent. So without further ado, let's go on to the third point. So just to say, he also makes the point that it is decentralized and anyone can run a node, and it's important for Bitcoin and democracy. Wow, yes, absolutely important for Bitcoin and democracy. Then on to his third point, he said he's going to defend the industry neutral use of energy. And he said that the 30% tax that Joe Biden and his party are currently trying to implement is totally invasive, and that everything that you do that requires electricity should not be monitored. I love the comparison that he made here between Bitcoin mining and energy use, because this is something that's always completely lost on people who raise this energy argument that Bitcoin uses too much energy. Bitcoin, one, is no different from any other data center. Like Amazon is a data center. Bitcoin mining companies are data centers. That's all they are. They've got machines that run using electricity, just like your laptop runs using electricity, just like your computer runs using electricity. Bitcoin miners are literally just electrical goods, is an electrical equipment that runs using electricity. That's all it is. It doesn't run using coal. It doesn't create coal. It doesn't create carbon dioxide emissions. It literally just takes electricity in, and that's it. And it turns on and it works. So the idea that Bitcoin uses electricity, well, everything uses electricity. We shouldn't be we shouldn't be a nation or a world that frowns upon the use of energy. If our gripe is on damaging the planet, if our gripe is about damaging the planet, the damage that the planet might be sustaining, that's more about the type of energy. And that, again, that's probably even a debatable issue, but I'm not even going to delve into that. But that's more about the type of, or the source of the energy, as opposed to the energy itself. Energy itself is not the issue. It's the source of energy. In fact, in the world as we speak right now, there is far less energy in the world. And I think it's just to give you an example of what that is like. We're doing this live. This is not pre-recorded. This is not planned, and anything can come up. As I said, we're live. So I'm just going to quickly search for world map at night live images. Can I make this bigger? So, I mean, this is a map I really wanted to make bigger if it can. Will it do it? Yes. Oh, no, not quite like that. As I said, we're doing this live, so here we go. So the idea that we use too much energy is absolutely absurd. It's absolutely absurd. Look at this map of the world and tell me, so we've got energy being used here, right? We've got some energy being used here. We've got some energy being used here, and maybe here, and some just around the edges there, you know, and some around there. How is this too much energy? In whose warped mind and idea is this too much energy? If an alien came to our planet and took a look at us, they're just going to look at us and say this is poor. That, you know, they're beginning to try and use a bit of energy, a little bit, a tiny bit of energy, but they know when they're there, because look at all the black spots. We've got more black spots than we have white dots. We do not use enough energy. We do not. There are large swathes of the world that has zero energy. This is an absolute shame. And yet you've got people in their warped minds in these places here and here who sit there talking about we use too much energy. Absolute absurdity in their ivory towers, because they have the luxury. They sit in their ivory towers and talk about there being too much energy. Africa has no energy. Africa has, this is a shame. We as a world should be ashamed of ourselves that Africa has zero energy within it. And look at South America. Zero energy in South America. We as a world should be ashamed of ourselves. And we're here complaining and talking about we use too much energy. We need more energy. So, I mean, this really just gets me, and every time, and you know, I just, yeah. As I said, this is a therapy session for me, these videos, so I'll take it for what it is. But I think I've made my point. So it's not about energy. It's about the source of the energy. It's where you get the energy from. As it turns out, Bitcoin mining gets its energy, goes to the cheapest source of energy. And also, I listened to a podcast recently where they made this point that in the world, wasted energy, there's energy that that is created but doesn't get used and just simply goes to waste. That 25% of the energy produced in the world goes to waste. I mean, never gets used. 25%. I may be wrong about the figures. I mean, I'm just remembering this off the top of my head. So I could be wrong about the figure, but whatever it is, it felt like it was 25% of all of the energy that's created. 25% of that, quarter of that, or 25% of that goes to waste. So there is a problem there, right? And Bitcoin has proven already that it can be a solution to that wasted energy. So for example, flared gas, that's wasted energy. And Bitcoin already has proven to be a good use of flared gas. And that also has a couple of benefits. One, the energy is not wasted. Two, it takes out methane, which is also known to be a cause or damage to the to our atmosphere, which could contribute to greenhouse gases. And so by actually utilizing that gas that's being flared, and by utilizing that gas, which would otherwise have been vented into the atmosphere, it prevents methane release into the atmosphere, and it also means that those gases are not flared, which also releases carbon monoxide into the atmosphere, which also is equally damaging. Well, not quite equally damaging, but also quite damaging, but not quite as damaging as if it were methane release into the atmosphere. So I say all that to say this: Bitcoin itself is the solution to waste energy. So that's one way that it does that. Then you've also got the other way of, and also Bitcoin mining is always drawn towards that close energy. Then the other way that Bitcoin really actually does help is renewable energy is intermittent. So in order to compensate for that intermittency, you need to create more renewable energy. Now, the other problem with creating too much renewable energy is that it's not cost efficient. Because why would you create a lot more? You can't afford it, because you're only going to get paid for the bits to get used, and the rest of it's going to get wasted. So enter Bitcoin again, in that being that last buyer, because it's going to be wasted. Bitcoin miners can buy that energy at a cheaper rate, meaning that then making that intermittent energy more available, more abundant, and able to be less intermittent because more of it is being created. So imagine a scenario where you've got a home that needs 10 kilowatts hours of energy to power the home. But if your solar panel only produces 5 kilowatts of energy, then then obviously you only generate enough electricity for 12 hours in a day. Let's say, but just being very generous here, 12 hours, you produce energy for 12 hours a day. And so that energy needs to be, for you to compensate for the 10, for the energy they use the day and night, you need to produce more than that, right? So you need to produce enough energy that's not just gonna cover you for the day, but also for the nighttime. And that could potentially mean you doubling, or at the very least increasing your capacity by 1.5 times what would normally be needed. So by increasing by 1.5 times what would be needed, that's going to cost you a lot more. Then you've got to think about storage, which is also going to cost you a lot more. But if you were, for example, and then think about that on a larger scale for big, massive corporations and companies, they need somewhere to store that energy, otherwise it just simply goes to waste. Because if the grid is full, and the grid tends to get a lot of capacity in the daytime, but at nighttime all of that and all of that energy, if it continues to produce, it's just going to go to waste. And that's where, Bitcoin mining comes in. They can make use of that energy that would otherwise have gone to waste at nighttime. And that would then smooth out the economies of the grid and the way that the complexity of the grid and how it functions. And Bitcoin is already doing this. And this is all completely lost on your Fox TV listener and CNN watcher and Bloomberg evangelizers. So these people have no idea. They don't think of these things at a much more deeper level to get to understand how powerful Bitcoin actually is, actually ironically actually good both from an energy perspective to help to increase the capacity of energy worldwide, but also to help encourage the use of the cheapest and best types of energy ultimately. So that was that point that he made there. And I know I went on and on about that, but I just thought it was such an important point. The fact that he talked about this 30% tax, which is ludicrous, that you'd want to tax Bitcoin mining, the very thing, of anything out there, incentives out there, of anything out there that's trying to help the planet, Bitcoin actually is shown to have more of the facets to achieve this. And yet it's the one thing that is being shut down and being taxed at 30%. A 30% tax in the US on Bitcoin miners would mean Bitcoin miners would have to move, because they don't even, their margin, the profit margin is definitely less than 30%, when you average it out over a year. So they would just walk. There's no way miners are going to operate where there's a 30% tax on revenue. They'll just walk. So and they'll just move and go, just like how the China ban resulted in Chinese miners moving to other jurisdictions. They'll just simply leave the US and go somewhere else and start up operations in more friendlier nations. El Salvador isn't too far away from the US, so it wouldn't really be that much of a journey or a distance for them to go to. So I'm just getting back this map up again. So, El Salvador, we're talking about the same, or roughly around the same continent. So it's not that far for them to go to, not like China, moving over from China, moving all the way across, from China. Sorry, should I say? I was pointing at Russia there for some reason. Sorry, I don't mean to point at Russia. But yeah, from China, moving over from China and moving all the way down to, to the US. That was a big distance. But, moving from the US to El Salvador wouldn't be too much of an issue, So I can see that happening. Now, of course, if that were to happen, I tell you now, many more South American countries will become pro Bitcoin when they see all of that revenue moving out of the US and moving into El Salvador. Everyone is every nation is going to, every South American nation will become Bitcoiners overnight, and they'll be absolutely welcoming all of that capital to move into their area. So I can assure you that would happen. Not 100%, but I would happily bet a handsome sum that would effectively happen. This is just pure game theory we're talking about here. Okay, so sorry, I mean, I've gone on and on. So then on to the fourth point. I can't believe I really just got to the fourth. This is how impressed I was by this speech. These points are so impressive. So on his fourth point, he says, USA is to remain the global hub for Bitcoin development, and he would reverse the growing hostility and keep the innovation at home. This goes to the same point that we mentioned below, and obviously this is a little bit more general, but again, still very important. I mean, if any of the other speakers or potential candidates had mentioned this point alone, I would have been very impressed. But given the 3 points that have been made earlier on, I mean, that just blown everything out of the water. But then to also say, like, we're going to support and encourage Bitcoiners to remain in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin companies to innovate and be here, favorable environments for them. Again, that's fantastic. And then the fifth point that he made is that he will consult with people like Bitcoiners. And as far as it's concerned, Bitcoin is not a security and should not be regulated. That's brilliant. No regulation for Bitcoin. Fantastic. And then he also said that he will pardon people like Ross Ulbricht if he finds that the reason for him being imprisoned is nothing to do with anything that he'd done wrong. Then he will be immediately pardoning him, is what he said. Wow. And I thought that was powerful. And then he also said that Bitcoin miners he then went back to the energy point, and he went doubled down on that energy point, which was it was just complete music. I mean, I was just so impressed by the speech. And if you haven't listened, I really encourage you to listen to that speech. If you've never heard him speak before, his tone of voice can be a little bit surprising and jarring, but it's easy to get used to. Once you've heard him talk, you know your ears will adjust to it, and he just makes perfect sense. He's a brilliant orator, and that wasn't the first time I've listened to him. The first time I listened to him was when I listened to the All In podcast. You know, the Chamath Palihapitiya and his co-friends, the Billionaires Club. Basically, they had him on the show. The subjects they put to him were, in my view personally, was frankly self-interested topics that they put to him, and some other general topics. They didn't. I mean, these guys that profess to be crypto bros, they didn't even mention Bitcoin at any point in their discussions with him. Very disappointing. Very disappointing. And then they quibbled with him about the nuclear points. Look, I don't take issue with him on the nuclear point. I could see why people might be concerned, but I don't think his view on nuclear was unreasonable. I mean, he's not pro-nuclear, clearly he isn't. And I can see why that might be worrying to some people, and I suspect some Bitcoiners might find that a little bit off-putting. But I'm going to say this: I don't think that his views on nuclear energy is necessarily unreasonable. He gave I mean, if you listen to his argument on the point, he gave a clear point, and he's not saying no. He never said no. He said, look, if you want to run nuclear, then don't expect the government to provide you with subsidies for that. And of course, you need to make sure that you clean up after your mess. So you need to make sure that as part of your plan, you need to have a clear idea for how you're going to dispose of your waste, and don't expect us to fund the cost of you disposing of your waste. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what exactly is wrong with that? I mean, what is wrong with what he said? Well, if he said, I'm going to tax you for doing nuclear, okay, that might be a different argument. He's not even talking about taxing nuclear. He just simply said, don't expect subsidies. Like, seriously, what's wrong with that? If the guy is not keen on nuclear, and he says that he thinks that, you know, it's quite an expensive endeavor for what it's worth, then, you know, you prove him wrong. Go out there and prove him wrong. Bitcoiners, we never asked for subsidies. No one's chasing after subsidies. We're just saying, you know, we just want to play on an equal playing field, you know, which means don't tax us ridiculous amounts like 30%. And we're fine. We'll get on with life, and we'll make our own way. So what is the problem of him saying that about nuclear? I don't get it. We can accept that point of view from Bitcoin, but yet why would we be upset about it if he says something like that for nuclear? If nuclear really is that fantastic an energy source, quite efficient and all of that, then go ahead. There are lots of private investors there who are willing to put their money on the line and invest. And we as Bitcoiners say that anyways. There's no subsidies, no government, no socialism. So what's the problem? I don't see the problem. But the crypto bros, the chamats and the like, and they were all like, oh well, oh, he doesn't get it. No, you don't get it. That's how I felt about that. I just felt you don't get it. So that's my take on it. I don't see that as a problem if you're putting forward some sort of project, or don't expect handouts. If it's viable, then it should succeed on its own 2 feet. If it's not viable, then so be it. Move on to the next one. So that's my take on that. I think I've flogged this dead horse for too long. And I think I may well call it a day there. But just some closing remarks. I really, really do like Robert F. Kennedy. Obviously, there are a few other obvious things that he's got going for himself. He's obviously the nephew of the late John F. Kennedy. There's also the conspiracy theory around John F. Kennedy having been assassinated by the CIA. Apparently, I have no idea. I know nothing about it, but obviously it's other talk that other people have said. And so you could imagine that the people might see him as an underdog, and the people do love an underdog. So you never know. He could be the dark horse in this presidential election race. And the fact that he's got such a strong and clear view on Bitcoin. Wow, that is powerful. That is powerful. I am looking forward to these elections just because of that alone. And I do hope that he progresses. I think he's definitely got a good chance of being the candidate for the Democratic Party. Whether and it'll be interesting to see if he comes up against Donald Trump. Two very charismatic and enigmatic characters. Both of them. The newspapers would be flabbergasted and exasperated if you had those two in the running as the next president. That would be interesting. But yeah, interesting times coming ahead next year. It's interesting to look forward to. But I thought I'll just leave you on that note. And again, if you've watched this far, thank you very much for watching. And yes, remember to please like and subscribe. That would really help the channel. I've got a massive 7 subscribers as we speak. It would be really good to get climbing into double figures and moving upwards and onwards. But yes, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next video. Oh, I forgot. Of course, don't forget that you shouldn't just adopt Bitcoin. You should adopt a Bitcoin lifestyle. I'll see you next time.